You only see sine and cosine. And I also don't know what period that would be. Calculus be the first or second period next year. All right. Number 1, y equals 2 secant 2x. We're just graphing these by amplitude and period. That's all we're doing on secant and cosecant. Amplitude and period, and it's still found the same way that we did for sine and cosine. Okay? So what's our amplitude on number 1? Now I'm going to say it's really not an amplitude here, but you guys still use that number to help graph. Okay? I'll just show you what that means in a minute. If you still want to label that as amplitude, that's fine. Amplitude is 2, period. How do you find the period of sine and cosine? 2 pi divided by what? B. The same way for secant and cosecant. What's your B value? 2 pi divided by 2 is pi. Very good. All right, now, let's draw a graph. How do I find out what my x coordinates are? I take my period and divide it by what? 4. By the way, I'm not going to ask you the domain and range on these graphs because it gets very complicated. I will only ask you domain and range on sine and cosine, okay? Because those are the most important too. All right. Now, so I took my period pi and I divided by 4, which is what? Pi over 4. So 1 pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, reduce, 3 pi over 4, 4 pi over 4, 5 pi over 4, 6 pi over 4 reduces to 3 pi over 2, 7 pi over 4, 8 pi over 4 is 2 pi. Alright. Secant is related to which one? Cosine. So do you start at the origin or start at the amp? Amp. Put your dots. Alright, now this is where it changes, okay? Wherever a dot is touching the x-axis, like right here, 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 that's where an asymptote's at. So that's where you draw an asymptote. Okay? All right, and then you just go back and you draw these curves, okay, at these points. And that's your graph, and that's all you do. You said, Mr. how do you know which way your curves should be drawn? You cannot go past that x-axis. So I couldn't draw it down like this. It has to go the other way. I can't go past this. So there's no way of drawing it that way. I'm going to have to draw it the other way. Does that make sense? Do y'all see what I did there? Okay, let's just look at one and see why it is what it is. Pi over 4. If I took pi over 4 and plugged it into x, what's 2 times pi over 4? Pi over 2. Think about secant. Okay, so the ordered pair for pi over 2 is 0, 1, isn't it? Secant is the reciprocal of which one? Cosine. Well, 1 over 0 is undefined, isn't it? That's why you see there's a asymptote at pi over 4. So you took these numbers and plugged in. That's why the asymptotes are there. Does that make sense? And you say, so how do you do cosecant? You do the same thing. You graph it as if it was sine. Wherever there's a dot on the x-axis, there's an asymptote. That's as hard as it gets, okay? So, looking at number 2. What is my amp? 2. Now, that's why you see the word amplitude in quotation, because really this is not the amp, but if this was a sine or cosine graph, it would be. Because here, amp is defined as the height of the graph, but you see these arrows, they keep going. But in the sine and cosine, that would have been the amp. Does that make sense? All right. Period. 2 pi divided by, what's your b value? 1. So that means your period is 2 pi. Take my 2 pi and I divide it by 4. That gives me pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, 2 pi, 5 pi over 2, 3 pi, 7 pi over 2, and 8 pi over 2. Now, cosecant is related to which one? Sine. So do I start at my origin or my amp? Origin. Now, if I was graphing this as a sine, do I need to look at that negative sign?
Yes.
Yes. So am I going to go up or down?
Down.
Down. So wherever there's a dot on the x-axis is the origin. So not origin, is an asymptote. So you have an asymptote at the origin. I come right beside that so I can make sure I can show there's an asymptote. And then I draw my curves. Do we need to do 2 more or 1 more is enough? 1. Okay. And we don't need to spend more than a day on this, do we? All right, number 3, secant of 1/2 x. What's my amp? 1. Very good. Your period would be 2 pi divided by what? 1/2. And you're at your point in your life. You can start doing stuff in here. You can see it. 2 pi divided by 1/2. If you wrote that out in the sky, what you going to do with that 1/2? So 2 pi divided by 1/2 would be what? 4 pi. Thank you. So your period is 4 pi. I take 4 pi and I divide it by 4. That means I'm going to start with pi and increase by 1 pi. So I got pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi, 5 pi, 6 pi, 7 pi, 8 pi. Secant is related to which one? Cosine. So if I was graphing cosine, would I start the origin or my amp? Okay. There's no reflection. Wherever a point appears on the x-axis is where I'm going to put my what? Asymptote. I'm going to have an asymptote right here. And that's my graph. Are we good with secant, cosecant functions? I need a hand signal. Okay, you can do your 4 homework problems. You can get that done. You got about 14 minutes. It's on page 19, 9 through 15 odd. What does it say do? For these, just graph it. The asymptotes is going to come into play with tangent and cotangent. So just do what we did in class. Just do the amplitude and period.